afterwards, this plane loses altitude and flies low over the rice paddies. Miyazaki inserts this scene in order to create a link to the Zero fighter plane scene at the end of the film. Jiro Horikoshi's dream of flying low over the fields on a beautiful plane is later realized by the pilots of the Zero fighter planes. There's a scene at the end of the film where Zero fighter planes fly low and fast over the fields like dragonflies. However, those pilots never come back. Jiro couldn't become a pilot after all. But that's why he survived. He didn't die because he couldn't become a pilot. So this first scene is here to enhance the significance of the last scene with the Zero fighter planes. After this scene, the villagers don't notice Jiro flying low over the ground. Nobody can see him. Even when he's flying under the bridge, the boatmen don't notice. But the girls working at the spinning mill notice him. This is intentional. Only the pretty girls in the factory notice him flying, but none of the guys in the scene notice him. And the girls even wave at him. Jiro waves back at them, but at this point, he's no longer the 13-year-old Jiro. If you look at him waving, he's already grown up and very good looking. Later, when his plane collides with the airship, he goes back to his 13-year-old self. But in his imagination, he's tall and good looking and not wearing glasses. That's an interesting point in these scenes. He's just 13 years old, so it's understandable. This is the dream of a young boy. Now, why did Miyazaki create this scene? Why did he only make the girls notice Jiro and not the guys? Why did he try to show that Jiro loves girls who treat him like superstars? Why did he try to show the embarrassing, or should I say, bad side of the protagonist? Prior to this film, Miyazaki had never done this before. He did it in comedy films like Lupin III and in Porco Rosso. He does that with comic characters, but not with a serious character like Jiro. He never pokes fun at his characters. That's because, of course, he's competing with Takahata. Takahata has argued through the years in his works like Grave of the Fireflies, Pompoko, The Tale of the Princess Kaguya, that overly subjective stories are bad fantasy. He hates animations that are too emotional. He has repeatedly said that you always need a certain level of objectivity towards the protagonist. So Miyazaki does the complete opposite. He totally immerses himself in the character. TV dramas are always like that. All moving animations and films are like that. J-pop is like that. The artists try to express how sad, how painful, how happy the protagonist is. They do whatever they can to invoke empathy. Takahata, on the other hand, says that we're surrounded by this type of work. It's like a drug. So he completely denounces it and says, we must create films that make people think. Miyazaki was probably irked by this, but was probably also half convinced by Takahata's comments. But this was his last animation, and he finally gave in. He finally did it, but it looks a bit awkward. It seems unnatural. He surely isn't used to this type of approach. Whereas Takahata is more objective and would have succeeded in making the character more credible. It was very unexpected of Miyazaki, and kind of hard to understand. Miyazaki usually does the opposite. He asks the audience to identify with Ashitaka's feelings, Chihiro's feelings, and Sophie's feelings towards Hao. But this time, Miyazaki accepted the criticism of Takahata and said, I could do that too, and took on the challenge to depict his protagonist a bit more objectively. He tried to be more critical towards Jiro, so as to not get lost in his emotions. And he hired an amateur, Hideaki Anno, as his leading voice-over actor. You might have thought that Miyazaki had gone mad, but that wasn't the case. The choice was deliberate. Anno read the script mechanically, making it hard for people to relate to the character emotionally. Miyazaki thought that people would automatically see his film from a different, more judgmental perspective. So this was Miyazaki and Ghibli producer Toshio Suzuki's plan. Some people might have thought that Anno wasn't right for the character, and I also think it was a huge mistake. A professional actor would be more than sufficiently skilled to express Jiro's inner personality, but Miyazaki wanted to keep it secret. He wanted people to think about Jiro's inner thoughts and wonder, what is he thinking? Instead of having to explicitly show it. A good actor would have made the character more human. Miyazaki didn't want that. He wanted to avoid that. But interestingly, although Miyazaki hired an amateur, Hideaki Anno, as the protagonist, this plan breaks down as we approach the end of the film. What happens is that it gradually falls back to the pattern of the usual Miyazaki film. Since Anno was involved from the start, the more he recorded, the better he got. As Anno becomes better at acting, Jiro develops a deeper character. Miyazaki even admits that Anno becomes too good at the end. This was his miscalculation. I'll talk about it next week. So on the storyboard, it says girls working at a spinning mill. From the Meiji to the Taisho era, there were several of these spinning mills in Japan. Girls who had just graduated from elementary school were kidnapped from rural areas. They had to work in silk mills. You can read about them in The Tragic History of Factory Girls. The point is, they're all factory girls wearing worn-out clothes, meaning that they're all in his league. If you look closely, you won't see any upper-class girls. Not one. Not in this scene. Jiro is always looking for someone who is easily in his league, and when he finds one, he is always drawn to her. That's the way he is. Miyazaki intentionally brings in these factory girls. When you look at it carefully, you can see that Miyazaki created Jiro's character with extreme care. It's so interesting. These girls are still in middle school or high school, so they're the same age as Jiro, and they're screaming and waving at him. In response to that, he flies in a circle, and the shadow of the plane falls on the factory chimney. That means he's close to the factory, but the plane doesn't disturb the smoke at all. Miyazaki is very meticulous in the scene, so you would have expected the smoke to be affected when the plane nears the chimney, but in fact, it's completely unaffected. This means Jiro doesn't quite understand the mechanism of a plane at this point. Some of you might say, that's because it's a dream. But when Jiro flies low over the ground, the grass makes waves and everything looks very real. But this frame clearly shows that Jiro has never been on a real plane and shows the limits of his imagination. He may have a bakelite switch, but he doesn't know about runways. He can't even imagine the smoke being disturbed by the air current of the plane. So you can see that Jiro might be studious and wealthy, This is ultimately just a dream.